the small Chinese reactors, the AP1000 in the US, and so on. So yeah. But now we're on the air, I can see.
Indeed.
We are on the air.
We're on the air, and I'm waiting to get let people in. So we are on air so that we can be on air on time. This is like a technical part. So in case we are on air and visible, hello everybody.
Judy, can you please make me co-host, because I need to share my screen soon.
There you go. Make co-host.
Okay, thanks.
So it's one of those annoying things about technology that we can't make the live streaming live at exactly the same time as the meeting goes live. We can either do it just before or just after. So we'll do it just before.
So maybe Jed, if you could just show your first slide while we are online without being active. See, like the.
While Jad is sharing his slides, I can't play music into the space.
Oh, okay. So I'll stop sharing.
No, that's okay. We don't have people coming in yet, so.
Yeah, no, it's more to try, and and Jed, you can also first say hi without the presentation, and then just pull it up when we have the.
Yeah, okay. I think Rana just wanted the Ren21 background. That's but anyway. We can have music and then and then Ren21 background.
Yeah. Shall we have music? Are we ready for music? Okay, let me hit the button.
event, and we're waiting. We're starting at 3 p.m., letting everybody who's joining us on Zoom come in, and then we'll start the discussion. So we ask for a bit more patience and look forward to be with you in a couple of minutes.
Rana, are you happy to have the people in from the waiting room now?
Yes, please. Welcome, everybody. So we'll give more of our colleagues or the colleagues online a bit more time to join us here. We will start as soon as everybody's settled in. And we're here to discuss basically the findings of the 2023 Global Status Report, in particularly the demand side module, so renewable energy in demand, and specifically in the industrial sectors. So we'll give colleagues online a bit more time to join us here. And yes, hello from my side. So I think we can start. So voices from the 2023 Global Status Report, leading trends in renewable energy uptake from the industrial sector. This is the topic we're going to discuss today. This is the topic we're going to dive into with data and knowledge from the Renewables Global Status Report, the 2023 collection, specifically focusing on the demand side sectors. And today we'll look specifically into the use of renewable energy in the industrial sectors. After the presentation, we will have a great panel discussion. And before jumping into the content, I would really like to give a very warm welcome from my side. For the ones of you who don't know me, my name is Rana Deep. I'm heading the Renewables Secretariat here in Paris. And since it's great actually to know who is with us in the room, I would really like to invite all of you to just add your name and the organization on Zoom. I think by now we all know how to do this. If you don't know, please type Judy a quick message. She will be happy to assist you. And I would really like to also ask all of you to mute yourself in case you're not speaking, because this will make the whole process smooth. And I'm very, very happy that you joined this event today. This event that builds really on the launch of the Renewables Global Status Report 2023 collection. I think what is great about this is we have a new format, so it's not one big report, but we'll have different reports that allow us to dive basically more into some of the details. And as we all know, the devil is in the detail. So I think it's a massive opportunity to really learn more. And since we have several energy consuming sectors, I also welcome you basically to the Renewables in Demand Week. Yesterday, we kicked this off with renewable energy in buildings. Today, we're looking into renewable in industry. Tomorrow, we'll look into renewables in transport. And on Thursday, renewables in agriculture. Now, let me directly turn to my colleague, Jed Baba, who is basically leading on the industrial activities in the knowledge and data team, and will show us a bit some of the key findings on this module. Jed, over to you.
Thank you, Rana, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's event. So renewables in the industrial sector. So first, we would like to talk a little bit about REN 21's unique methodology in constructing reports and gathering data. So we pride ourselves with our crowd-sourced data, we build on our community of experts and our community as a whole to engage with us, to provide us data and to validate our data collection and to help us communicate and create dialogues and debate and helping us changing the norms about renewables. So this year's GSR 2023 is the 18th edition of the GSR. We've been producing renewables in the Global Status Report of Renewables since 2005. And as you can see from the publication's design, it has really gone through a lot of evolution in terms of design and in terms of structure. So this year's GSR really takes a different approach, especially because of the global changes that we've been seeing starting October 2021 with the rapid economic rebound following the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to tighter energy markets. This energy crisis, the energy prices started rising, and this energy crisis was further exacerbated by the Russian Federation invasion of Ukraine last year in February. And in 2022, energy prices reached their highest levels since 2008 and impacting all energy consuming sectors. So as you know, energy feeds into everything, into the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the cell phones we use. So because of high energy prices, high inflation became a global phenomenon in 2022. So to reflect that in the GSR, we really wanted to look at the energy consuming sector and look to their side of the story, why they are increasing their uptake of renewables. So the GSR 2023 is built in a modular approach. So the first module looks at the renewables in energy demand, and it splits into 4 energy consuming sectors. So yesterday we dig a little bit deeper in the buildings module. Today we're going to dig a little bit deeper in the industry module, and tomorrow we're going to have a transport event, and on Thursday an agriculture event. And the other 4 modules that we are producing in the next 2 months. One will look at renewables and energy supply. So we will look at all renewable energy technologies. Another publication will be dedicated to renewable energy systems and infrastructure. A third publication will really look at the economic and social value creation that can be created through renewables. And finally, a global overview that will serve as a summary or a global narrative to what happens or the most important trends that happen in renewables during 2022. So we're very happy to have this approach, because it really allows us to take a closer look and a deeper look at the different sectors and the different technologies and the different aspects of renewables in general. So for the energy consuming sectors, and this is a media analysis that we did before this event to see how if there was any uptake in renewables in media. So if people were posting more social media posts about renewables in different energy consuming sectors, or there was any news reports that are covering renewables in each sector more prominently in 2022. So in the 3 main sectors, we see an increase, almost double in buildings, so 124% increase. In industry, 91% increase, also like almost double dimensions from 2001 to 2021 to 2022. And we see that industry is the most mentioned sector when it comes to renewables compared to the other 4. So digging more deeper into the report, this first slide or figure that we produced shows the different shares of renewables in the different sectors. So we see that renewables, the uptake of renewables is uneven across sectors, and the energy transition is not happening fast enough. We see that we are on the right path, but the pace is what's lacking. So industries have the highest share of renewables with 16.8%, and this is followed by buildings with 15.5%, and then also agriculture with the same rate, and the lowest share goes to transport with 4.1% only. In all energy consuming sectors, the demand for or the consumption of renewables grew at an average of 4.7% per year between 2010 and 2020. Also for the renewables in the industrial sector, we see that modern biomass represent 8.2% of the share of renewables in industry. And we see that there are two main subsectors that are leading the industrial sector, and we will look more deeper in the next few slides about the share of renewables in different sectors. For the we clearly saw that industries are the most affected sector in the energy crisis, and although industry contributes to 25% of GDP and employs 25% of global workforce, it consumes 33% of global energy. So the impact of the crisis on the sector was high, and we see this impact especially when we looked at major trends in 2022 concerning the industrial sector. So especially for energy intensive industries, they were hit the hardest in 2022. Some of them had to cut production, or they were forced to relocate to places where energy was more affordable or energy prices were more stable. So, for example, a lot of German and European aluminium manufacturers, for example, shut down for a few months during 2022. A Norwegian fertilizer company, for example, had to shut down because of the cost to produce urea, for example, went to $2,000 per ton, where, for example, in the US, this was almost $200 per ton. So a huge increase in their cost due to the energy prices. Another trend that we saw also is the rise of corporate PPAs. So it's really a way that industries are looking for to hedge themselves from energy prices and energy price fluctuation. So corporate PPA witnessed an increase, a 21% increase, for example, in Europe, a year-to-year growth compared to 2021. And a lot of companies from different subsectors were looking for PPAs to procure their electricity. So, for example, steel and cement companies are looking at PPAs. ArcelorMittal invested in wind and solar power plants in Argentina and India. Some German steel makers also signed PPAs to power their electric furnaces. In the chemical sector, also some companies in Europe also signed corporate PPAs, and also for the so we looked at the main trends. A long decade trend from 2010 to 2020 for the reasons of the rise of renewables in the sector. So, for example, we looked at electrification rates across sectors, and we saw that electrification rose from 21% in 2010 to 25% in 2020 in the industrial sector. This means that 75% of energy used in the sector is still used for process heat. So renewable electricity is being carried by electrification, but we believe that there's a limit of how much renewable can increase because of this high use of heat in the sector. So heat pumps clearly can play a role in electrifying the energy demand in the industrial sector. However, this can be limited to applications lower than 400 degrees. So what's interesting also that where we looked at different subsectors and the shares of renewables in each subsectors. So we see that the pulp and the paper industries have the highest share of renewables in the sector with 46%, and followed by food and tobacco is 32%. And followed by the mining and quarrying sector with 14%, and chemical sector and iron and steel with much lower rates with around 6 and 7%. So what's interesting is, despite like similar rates of electrification, there's a huge difference in renewable energy shares in the sector. So the pulp and paper industry have the highest share, and especially this is because of the use of their own bio-waste, but also some examples include the increased use of geothermal for paper drying, and also like solar thermal applications. For solar thermal, actually, food and tobacco is the highest sector that uses concentrated solar therming for its own uses, but also what's interesting in the food sector, it's the highest uptaker of biogas, for example, using anaerobic digestion in the food and tobacco industry is really picking up in some very big companies, such as, like, for example, Danone in France or Unilever in the UK. They use anaerobic digestion to generate heat and electricity in their own production facilities. But like we really would like to focus on the iron and chemical industries because they have the lowest share, and they have like between them 32% of all industrial energy demand. So, and this is what's a little bit specific to the industrial sector, is that we need tailored policies for industry subsectors, as you can see that the share of renewables and the energy intensity vary greatly between sectors. So it's a challenging task to tailor specific policies for each industry subsector. But there are hopes for reasons for optimism. Also, we did a media analysis on the uptake of or dimensions of renewables in each industry subsector, and we can see like almost double dimensions from year to year, from 2021 to 2022 in all subsectors. The biggest increase is in the cement industry, for example, and we see like also a lot of some very big cement manufacturers looking at PPAs. This include, for example, Suez Cement in Egypt, Cemex in Spain, and Lafarge in Hungary. So these more and more even industries that didn't traditionally look at renewables, they're looking more increasingly at renewables to power at least the electric part of their consumption. The final kind of message that we have in this industrial module is the difference of the number of countries that are mandating or have regulatory policies for the demand sectors. So in this, the number of countries has been stagnating for industries for the last 4 years. There are only 9 countries that have mandates for renewables in the industrial sector, and most of the policies remain financial incentives that support renewables in the industrial sector. We see also some mixed signals from governments concerning renewables, and at the same time, like increasing the support for fossil fuel subsidies, where in 2022 alone, these rose for over $1 trillion, and it's an 85% increase compared to 2021. And also governments looking to new oil and gas explorations, building LNG terminals, looking for countries to replace, for example, Russian gas and etc. But also something that we are seeing more a positive, maybe a development regarding policy, that we're seeing now, like more integrated policies that are bridging silos between energy and industrial policies. So 2 important policies to mention is the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, and REPower EU, which are two policies that are bridging between energy and industrial policy. So they are giving a lot of tax credit and financial incentive to install renewable energy technologies in all sectors, in industry, in buildings, in residential buildings, and consumer, in all types of economic activities, and even residential. But also they are looking at renewable manufacturing and energy transition manufacturing in general, and they're giving incentives to these kinds of sectors as a way to respond to the poly crisis that we saw in 2022. So the industrial sector is leading from all the sectors that we looked at in GSR 2023. It has 16.8% of renewables, but there are clear challenges that are need still to be tackled. So the high temperature and industrial processes remain a challenge to overcome for the integration of renewables in these processes. And in many industrial sectors, equipment are capital intensive, and they are long-lived, and they are hard to replace in a lot of places. One message that we can have is to really look at tailored policies for specific industrial subsectors, because they vary greatly in energy intensity and renewable energy uptakes, and they need tailored approach. So I'll end here and pass it over to Rana for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jed. I think you have the next slide with our great panel, right? So that people can see who, if I'm not mistaken. Can you show your next slide, please?
I'm trying, yes.
Excellent. So, I have now an announcement in front of. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. So first of all, thanks, Jed. As you can see, it's always a mix between hard facts and big trend that we identify with a community media analysis, screening, and where indeed renewable energy appears to be an answer also from the industry side we are also obviously aware of the tension that exists. And I'm very happy to have basically Tarek and Taira from UNIDO with us, the UN Organization for Industrial Development, or UN Industrial Development Organization, and Thomas Karberger from the Renewable Energy Institute. And Jed, you're also going to join the panel. So looking forward to have you here. So I think if you stop sharing your screen, we will have the panel directly on the screen. Excellent. So I promised Thomas that I'm going to comment on his look. He is based in Sweden and has a wonderful blue sky behind him. And we would all love to be with you, Thomas, I think.
Yes, sometimes the weather is good, even in Sweden.
Yes, that's really good to hear. So thanks to all three of you for joining us here. So maybe so I'll ask I think Tarek and Thomas, both of you, a bit of, if you could complement what Jed has basically shared on the trends in 2022, and from your point of view, to what extent is renewable energy 22 crisis creating an opportunity for renewable energy uptake in the industry? So Tarek, why don't you start? I think also we had lots of examples, obviously in industrialized economies, but we also know that much is happening in developing emerging economies. So maybe you could kick us off.
Thank you, Rana, and thank you, Jad. And I must say at the start of this conversation, first of all, to thank REN21 and commend you on this deep dive into demand side analysis of the integration of renewable energy. I think it's a very much welcomed piece of analytics, considering now the kind of conversation we see this year around industry, particularly where I come from, and decarbonization of industry. I'm actually joining from India, from Gujarat, where I'm attending the Energy Transition Working Group meeting of the G20, which is basically, yesterday we have had a deep dive into one of the priority area of the Indian presidency around decarbonization of industry, particularly some refer to it as the hard to abate sector, but we want to abandon this term and say the energy intensive or emission intensive sectors, because hard is a negative term, and we want to move to a more positive possibility, a term that explains possibilities. But just to jump into the question that you raised, indeed, I mean, I probably will bring a more perspective from developing countries where UNIDO is more active. Perhaps I think Thomas probably have better insights than me on more industrialized advanced economies. But what we have seen in the last 2 years as part of the crisis, of course, industry, as you said in the report, was hit hard because of the rising energy prices and the disruption also to supply chains because of the COVID crisis. But actually, this was, in some markets, we have noticed that this was an opportunity to drive demand for renewables. The increase in prices and utilities and inability to deliver adequate electricity or power to some industry led to a boom in captive market for industry. Contracts, we have seen more demand for contracts to do independent power purchase agreements and put a noticeable example. I mean, just to concrete example, we have a project in Pakistan where we're trying to promote renewable energy in industry for the last 5 years. It was so stagnant and was so difficult to get the government to move and set an incentive and policies in the first 3 years. And suddenly in the last year, we have seen really an increased uptake of that. Similarly, we have seen that in South Africa. Similarly, we have seen that in countries in Egypt as well. But Egypt is slightly, the context is slightly different, the drivers slightly different, but we have seen that also picking up. So that we have seen happening. But the challenge is, even if the industry wants to move in that direction, there are structural challenges facing industry. First of all, most of SMEs, where the demand is concentrated, they are not in the business of producing energy. So if cooperation with the utilities and the utilities is not part of the driving the agenda, sometimes it's very difficult, especially those industries that are connected to the utilities and rely on electricity supply. So if the regulations are not conducive to allow for net metering connections. So, and again, I'm talking about SMEs where the bulk of energy can be sort of, you can drive the integration of renewable energy. Sort of when we look at the energy intensive large industries, that's a completely different market. We can sort of discuss later, but I think I'll stop here on this and just bringing some of anecdotal evidence, and I can come back to the conversation on the energy intensive sectors and on what kind of challenges we're facing there. So I'll stop here and pass it on to Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tarek. Thomas, I think maybe if you can address those parts, probably more from an industrialized emerging countries perspective.
Yes, thank you, Tarek, and thank you, Jad, for your contributions. I would like to emphasize the long-term trends and how this will play out. I think it's quite unavoidable now that the economic advantage, the cost advantage of renewable electricity, solar and wind in particular, reached a point already more than 5 years ago when solar and wind in most of the world became the cheapest source of new electricity generating capacity, and also having the lowest marginal cost. It will always be prioritized in the dispatch order of electricity systems. And this has been extremely important for the rapid growth in solar and wind globally. What few people did notice was that we then passed another very important milestone, maybe 5, 6, in some countries 7 years ago, when solar and wind cost fell to a level where solar and wind electricity became cheaper than crude oil per unit energy. It was not that solar and wind electricity outcompeted oil for electricity generation, but solar and wind electricity was cheaper per unit energy than crude oil. This is hidden by the fact that we trade oil in dollars per barrel and electricity in dollars per megawatt hour, but it's a very important milestone. We have seen since then that solar and wind electricity sometimes has been or frequently been cheaper than fossil methane gas as well, as LNG, for example, and sometimes even cheaper than coal in the last year. This has significant consequences. We are in a process in most countries where solar and wind electricity is taking over more and more of electricity generation. Electricity prices are high, solar and wind installations are profitable. They don't really need any subsidies anymore. If fossil fuel-based electricity generation is not subsidized, then they are profitable. In some markets where all electricity is already decarbonized, where you have only low marginal cost nuclear left and solar and wind and hydropower, then prices may get low enough to use electricity not only to substitute oil in the transport sector, but also to start producing hydrogen to replace fossil fuels in industry. And that will open up for a lot of very important transitions in the industry. It makes it possible to use renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, to produce fertilizers. It makes it possible to use hydrogen instead of coke to reduce iron ore into sponge iron and then make steel out of it. And it makes it possible for other high temperature applications where traditionally fossil fuels have been used to generate very high temperature heat. You can now use hydrogen instead. So this will facilitate the transition away from fossil fuels, not only for electricity generation, but also for transport and industry. And I would say it's globally unavoidable, but where in the world this will this transition will go fastest will depend on political decisions, but of course also on the natural conditions. Some countries have slightly better wind and solar conditions than others, and that may be important.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Maybe allow me to have a quick follow-up question on this, because this awareness about renewable energy being a cheaper, or basically the energy cost per energy unit, or cost per energy unit, renewable energy being cheaper. How much do you think energy consumers, industrial energy consumers, are today aware of this? And isn't the reality that we still have 1 trillion of fossil fuel subsidies spent by public money of governments quite distorting the market and not giving the investment security that is required by industry and energy consumers to make the shift?
Indeed, subsidies are a problem, but I think when you look at many of these compilations of global subsidies, there are a few often oil exporting countries who also have a large share of these subsidies. So I don't think we should overrate the global importance of subsidies. They are also concentrated to a few countries. When it comes to this awareness of the new economic setting, I think it is spreading quite quickly at the moment. But as I said, this milestone was passed some years ago, and it took a long time for people to start understanding it. In many countries where the electricity system is still dominated by fossil fuel-based electricity generation, the cost of electricity was not affected directly. And also in some of these markets where the profit margins potentially were large, the cost of new solar and wind was also affected by the fact that there was such profit margins that all subcontractors and sub-suppliers were eager to get their share. So when you looked at the cost of solar and wind in these markets, they did not appear as cheap as they actually could be.
Maybe before coming to you, Jed and Tarek, you mentioned basically from some of the examples that the energy consumers didn't have experience in producing their own energy and being involved in the market discussions and the policy framing. We also hear that basically the market reality or the market conditions are fundamental. Do you think that is it right to say that we need to know or start knowing our clients better and have the energy supply and the energy demand players lobbying on the same side for better market conditions, because it's an answer to energy security and energy price crises? And how can we do this?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is a fundamental challenge we have been facing because industry needs reliability, needs if you have a production line, and so the easiest option is to say, okay, I get my electricity from the grid, and I can guarantee 24 hours electricity, and I don't have interruptions to production lines. So when you start tinkering with that reliability, and if you want to create a hybrid system, and you're not sure of sort of you don't have the confidence, so there's a bit of reluctance for the industry to do that, and we face that in the solar heat market. I mean, so we've been trying to introduce, for example, solar thermal technologies in Egypt for industrial applications. The uptake of industry was took a long time because of the lack of confidence in the supply side of installations, plug and play technologies, bulletproof. So if sort of we have about 50, 100 years experience with a diesel-fired boiler or even an electric boiler, but a lot of the food, let's say the food industry rely on steam, and you need a reliable supply of steam, and you can do this with solar thermal technology today. It's not complicated. I mean, and actually it can be cost competitive, but it's the system optimization challenges and the qualified suppliers on the market and the service providers to deliver these solutions. But we start to see some of these coming on the market. Actually, one of them is a Swedish company that now putting a lot of this solar, high temperature solar thermal heat and manufacturing the technology. I saw recently that they have put a factory in Egypt and one coming up in Latin America somewhere. So this is coming up. So this is one important challenge is to really evolve the what's called the supply side of the technology value chain around this segment. And then there was another point I wanted to raise, is that sometimes also the decisions to switch on the industry side are not straightforward, because again you might not have the option to create your own captive solution. So that, again, there is a regulatory barrier there in many markets. That also we start to see that it's being broken down. So we see more relaxing of that side. And the reason why it's being relaxed is also the utilities are not giving up to deliver reliable electricity to some of the high energy demand markets. So these are the two observations I have from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes,
I think
sure.
what Tarek just said is in a way quite encouraging, because if the main problem is a lack of understanding and confidence, that is something that will disappear with time, with increased experience. Some of the institutional factors that are politically designed may turn out to be more problematic, because we also have a very strong vested interest in influencing policymaking from those who are owners of the old power plants and system components that will lose their value from this development. So the lack of understanding is something that is a quite enjoyable opportunity to deal with. The institutional factors will be more of a fight with the incumbent economic interests.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Thomas. And maybe Jed, just to build on this, the vested interests seem to be like on the supply side. To what extent do you think that from what you see, the energy consumers and industry that are actually GDP contributors and are offering jobs in countries can be a key lever to also change the political and institutional dynamics?
Yeah, I would like to build on two things. One thing that Thomas said and one thing that Tarek said. So yes, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, renewables proved their case in their cost competitiveness, and I think it was really shown this year or in 2022 after the energy crisis. I mean, industry started taking that into consideration more clearly because of a rise in oil prices to switch to renewables. And the other side is the reliability that renewables can provide. So yes, traditionally maybe grids have been the most reliable. But for example, I come from Lebanon, and the grids are not the most reliable entity there. So we used to go to industries, try to convince them to switch, and it was this kind of argument we're using. So if you want reliability, it's really the renewable that can provide you this, and it's also it's the reliability and how do you say, like predictability, because once you pay the capital cost, most of the O&M afterwards is practically negligible. So and this I think these two factors are really becoming more understandable, or and industries are more seeing the opportunities that your renewables can provide in both reliability, affordability, and predictability, I think, of what renewables can provide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe a quick follow-up discussion, Jed, also to lead us into hydrogen discussion, because we speak about electricity here. Thomas, you have also spoken about the interlinkage between renewable electricity and hydrogen. The reality today is, especially when we're looking into the industrial sectors that have high shares of renewable energy already, they're using a lot of biomass, so pulp and paper, food. What about what are innovation trends you see to also address the heating part, maybe not only from the hydrogen side, but are there other technological trends identified, and how are the energy consumers basically jumping on those opportunities?
Well, as Tarek said, there are concentrated solar power solutions and there are hydrogen solutions. But I think we are also enjoying a development where there are new combinations of technologies. One example where there is now a final investment decision taken is a project where the company intends to use carbon dioxide from a biomass-fueled cogeneration plant and combine that renewable carbon dioxide with hydrogen produced from electricity to produce methanol that will be used for long-distance shipping. And that's a consequence of biomass being used to produce electricity and heat, and other renewable electricity being used to produce hydrogen. And then you can substitute the fossil fuels currently used in long-term shipping. And that's a wonderful combination of these new technologies that are evolving together. Another example, which I think is even more important for what Jad talked about, the stability and predictability and so on, is the development where low-cost electricity used in the transport sector has resulted in a scale-up of battery manufacturing, which has resulted in a dramatic drop in battery costs, which had made it possible to use batteries also in large grid-connected systems. And grid-connected batteries can be by far outcompeting other alternatives to keep frequency and voltage stable in electricity grids, which is a very useful new contribution to systems with a large share of solar and wind electricity. So I think what is happening here is that we're seeing the kind of industrial system development where one technology supports another, supporting the first, and making this transition accelerate even further.
Mm-hmm. Maybe to build on this, and Thomas, I think there's it's really interesting. That's indeed why we're going into modules from Renton one side and report on demand, supply, infrastructure, and then the value to society, because we see that it's about system changes. Now, the industrial ecosystem evolving is also something which we have identified as I think that eco-industrial parks or harbors play basically a role in terms of attracting industry. I think, Tarek, I recall that in the preparation to this report, you had also pushed this topic very much to the forefront. So what is your view on eco-industrial parks, and can they become a strategic vehicle to create basically overall industrial ecosystems around renewable energy?
Absolutely, absolutely. Not only on solar-based renewable energy, but actually a broad type of energy options and circularity of waste heat, and so you can actually optimize the energy system if you have an industrial park approach. We tried to pilot this, of course. It's very difficult if you start from a brown field, but if you have a green field industrial park and you smartly think in building some of these synergies, you have greater opportunities. And we know that in Africa, there's quite a concerted movement around industrial parks, and that's where we're putting the effort to create shared utility scale renewable energy base for the industrial park, looking at steam supply, heat supply. If you have also an opportunity to circulate lower grade heat from one facility and put it into another facility, all these create synergies, lower the cost, and at the end of the day, lower the emissions and the footprint. There's a transaction cost involved. You need a nudge. You need, of course, to have a competent authorities or institution to push and to overcome this transaction cost barrier to get industry to collaborate and push. But I think there's tremendous opportunity in that anchor, particularly countries that are on a strong path to increase manufacturing value additions, build clusters of park. We started this conversation, for example, with Senegal now because they're building industrial parks, Ethiopia, South Africa, and a few other countries.
Mm-hmm. Maybe to build on this, Jed, because so obviously policies and regulatory frameworks play a role here. And if we're thinking about like, for instance, industrial parks and more systems approach, it's probably not only at the national government level, but also subnational. What are maybe some of the trends? What can governments do to really create those ecosystems and have full value chains from the energy production to the energy consumption?
I think we will really go much deeper into these topics. What governments are doing in industrial policy in general and trade policy more also in general in our last publication of this collection, which is going to be the social and economic value creation with the renewables. So we started some of the research and we started drafting, and we really see a clear trend of countries trying to increase the local value of renewable energy investment in their own economies. So countries are doing it in different ways. Somehow some countries more successful than others, but maybe some kind of sometimes tax credits or tax incentives for renewable energy manufacturing. Some countries are putting local content rules on renewable energy investment or installation. And some countries are, for example, banning the export of unprocessed, for example, raw material that are used for the energy transition. So, but I think it all falls down into skilling. So if you don't really invest in skilling your own population, like none of these policies will really have the effect that you desire. So it's really a combination of having these policies, having a terrain ready for investment, and also investing in the human capital.
Mm-hmm. So I guess like knowledge, awareness, skilling are key topics.
If I may just add to this.
Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing we have learned from our technical cooperation programs, which we did almost in 20 countries, if you combine capacity building in small and medium enterprises around energy management, it leads to, of course, you hit two birds with one stone. One is that you start getting more efficient, but also you start looking at the cost of electricity and start exploring the options of integrating renewable energy. So building capacity in SMEs around understanding, your energy systems, your sort of basic energy management skills within firms, or applying any of the global standards like ISO 15001 or any of these tools helps in accelerating adoption of renewable energy. Just it's anecdotal. I don't have the evidence, but we have seen it more often in some cases when we did a bit of capacity building on energy efficiency in firms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's always a question of energy literacy. Now I'm just going to ask this hydrogen question. Renewable-based hydrogen is one part. Then we have all rainbow colors of the world when we categorize hydrogen. How do we ensure, especially in the industrial part, that the real advantages of renewable-based hydrogen are not, how do we ensure the better literacy of what is happening on all the non-green hydrogen parts, and how industry and also governments are jumping on this? Thomas.
Well, I think all those colors used are now more confusing than clarifying. And I'm not sure that it will be easy to sort of find an institutional setting that will solve all the problems of sorting out the different hydrogen supply chains. But I'm quite sure that those companies who have a long-term desire to actually build something that is going to be economically and environmentally sustainable, they will ensure that they have supply chains that are both sustainable in both these dimensions. But I would like to add another idea to what Tarek just talked about of these industrial parks and things like that. I also think we will see, as a result of all these methods of skilling and development and so on, that we will see some countries that will be more successful than others, and not necessarily those that are industrially successful today. And that's quite an exciting issue, because the resource base, as well as the skills and ability to utilize these new technological options, will not necessarily be in the countries that have existing industrial strength. They may well be in other parts of the world. And that is an opportunity for some countries that are developing. It's an opportunity for countries that we see in the Middle East that are currently basing their economies of export of fossil fuels, where they also have developed some of the world's cheapest solar electricity generating facilities. And with good leadership, skills, and ability to utilize new technologies, these countries may be very successful economically and outcompete many of the old industrial countries, where the conserving reactionary economic interest may be damaging development.
So we often say like that we really hope that in 5 years' time we will not look back that for geopolitical and trade issue reasons we will look back and have forgotten that there is a climate crisis ongoing. And yeah, so maybe before we will have a Q&A session, but I would really like to ask all three of you a final question before moving to a short survey and the Q&A. So what are the key 2 actions to take to really build on the momentum? Tarek.
To build on the momentum, I think in the last year we have been looking at the option of, especially if you want to look at industrial commodities like steel, cement, fertilizers, demand signals are important. If the market starts to give demand signal that we are interested in low carbon steel, low carbon cement, low carbon fertilizers, I think the industry will respond. But what we need is demand signals, and some of these commodities where governments are and local governments are the major buyers actually of infrastructure projects, etc. They can drive this. So we're encouraging that, put all the politics aside and just put a clear criteria. Said we want 30% embedded carbon in the project up to 2023. And project that come on the market after 23, you want 50% less embedded carbon. I think industry, with that stability, industry will move faster. So we encourage, I think this is where the right way to go. And I think it's good that countries collaborate on this. It's not enough that one country does it. That's why international cooperation or a consensus among the large buyers of these commodities in driving these demand signals would be most important.
Mm-hmm. Thomas.
I think one of the most important issues now is to deal with all the reactionary campaigning going on. There are companies who want to slow down the development. There are countries. I think Russia is a typical example of a country with enormous vested interest in export of conventional fuels and no plan B. And they're now in a very hostile mode towards other countries in the world. These forces who want to slow down development do so by campaigning, trying to mobilize people and politicians against the development. And organizations like REN21 and some of the more progressive industrial federations and companies have an important role to play to explain the real opportunities. I think that is by far the most important thing at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. Indeed, I mean, I had just some feedback from some UNESCAP meetings and UNDP colleagues who were very concerned about how Russia was pushing natural gas in many Asian countries, and so that's certainly something which requires our attention. Jed, maybe Thomas already mentioned how Renewable can play a role in this, but what is your view on? I mean, we heard literacy, data, bringing clients and suppliers together, or their thinking and narratives.
Yeah, I think like it's important to see the overall picture and not, while focusing on the energy intensive industries, not to forget SMEs, while focusing on industrial policies, not to forget reskilling and education, while focusing on renewable energy, not to forget energy efficiency. So it's really like a systemic view, and like we need to push this narrative like that renewables are there to really shake the system and build a better future. I think this is the narrative that we can push, and with like going in with the details, but also having a holistic view. I think this is my 2 cents.
So we shake the system not only with a climate discussion, but with an economic competitive advantage of renewable energy on supply and demand, and we have new allies. Now, we have lots of allies actually with us in this room, and please don't leave, Thomas and Tarek, and we still would like to tap into your brains. I'm asking the audience to please continue posting your questions in the chat. We'll follow up on this in the next session, not the next session, but just after a short survey. Judy, over to you.
I think that Jad is introducing the survey. Have I got that correct?
Oh, sorry.
Jad, not so much a survey, but there are polls.
Yes, a poll. Sorry,
okay.
a poll.
Can you see the poll? Okay. So the first question is, what's the share of renewables in the industrial sector? I see 2 correct answers. Okay. So a lot of us are answering. I can't answer, but yeah, we have almost 20 answers. So maybe I'll stop at 50% of participation, and we can move to the next poll. I first look at the results, and we're at 48%. Should I end it?
Yes.
Yes, let's move to the next question.
All right. Okay.
So did people know?
I ended at 51%, and so 23 of us answered, and yes, so 57% got a correct answer. It's it's nice to know that people were listening and people know the industrial sector and the share of renewables in the sector. Maybe half of this 16.8% is renewable electricity. The other half is modern bioenergy, and still very low percentage of modern heat, so solar and geothermal heat. So only 0.1% we saw of the share of total energy consumption in industry.
And we have another question, right? So
yeah, I will ask it now. Failed to start a poll. Okay, I don't know why.
No, we can see it. Don't worry.
So, in your perspective, what are the strongest drivers of renewables in industry? We have four answers and 4 possible answers, and no, really, not one correct answers. I think all of these are drivers of renewables in industry, but maybe some drivers take the lead in certain years or a certain moment. I see that most answers are leaning towards one option. Yeah. So most people think that energy cost is the biggest driver of renewables. The second and third reasons are equal with energy security and climate change, and the last driver and the last answer share of answers is electrification. I think, yeah, maybe it's not a very good sign, because energy cost can change. Sometimes oil prices can go down, and sometimes, so it is a fluctuating answer.
Okay, but on the other hand, we see that it clearly moves renewable energy into the economic discussion too, and that governments need to ensure that the energy cost is, that the pricing is the right one, right? So
exactly.
Maybe let's move to the last question, and then we'll take the Q&A. And I'll ask my panelists to come back.
Also, like, most people answered correctly, saying pulp and paper as the most subsector with the highest renewable energy share. And second was still iron and steel, although iron and steel is the lowest actually sector with the lowest share of renewables. Maybe the last poll.
Sorry, Jed, we're going to close this now, actually, to move to the Q&A, because we have like a couple of questions. Tarek and Thomas, could you join us back here? And I saw that we had one hands up already. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So I'll start with a hands up. I think we had Jürgen joining us. So Jürgen, thank you for being back in another sectoral module. You're muted. Thank
you, Jana, for the distinct panel today. Very, very exciting. I have a question regarding curtailment and restrictions, which are posted, especially in Germany. I can only talk about Germany, about limiting industry and commercial applications to build up a maximum size of solar on their facilities, and then also to force them to sell their energy to the grid and then to buy the power back at high cost. Shouldn't we open that up and get rid of all these bureaucratic restrictions in order to scale up renewables?
Thank you, Jürgen. Thomas, I see you nodding. Maybe you want to take this.
Yeah, that sounds good. There are many different institutional barriers to renewables in the world. And as I said, that is one way that the incumbent industry is trying to slow down the development. In some cases, there are real physical limitations on grid capacity where you need to improve the grid or introduce more local energy storage and so on. But otherwise, most of these barriers today are institutional and can be seen as a way of slowing down the development, which is in the interest of the incumbent companies. And in some countries, the incumbent companies are even given the right to slow down development by them not only controlling conventional energy supply, but also, for example, the electricity grid. Japan is a good example.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just a follow-up question from the chat, actually, which is not exactly the same, but a bit complementary. Do you think that the increased penetration of renewables into the electricity grids, which is actually to be expected, could slow down the uptake of renewables in the industrial sector, just because the energy consumers are waiting for having high penetrations? And
I'm not sure how
so
to.
the question of
that.
first movers. So will the industry wait to have high penetrations of renewable electricity from the supply side and not be the first movers, because the cost might go down still
No, I think it's at the moment, it's definitely the other way around, that companies that are early movers buying renewable electricity under long-term contracts usually get a better deal than those who are slow and reluctant to move. And I know many companies in Europe that have had long PPAs, power procurement contracts with renewable energy suppliers, who have been exceptionally happy during the last 2 years with high prices. So I don't think there is any rational reason to not to engage in these kind of contracts immediately.
The situation might transpire differently in developing and emerging markets, primarily due to the cost of capital. I mean, the cost of capital is the main driver of the cost of renewable energy, because the price of the equipment has gone down. But if you are a project developer, you add a premium on the cost of capital. And so because of all kind of country risk, political risk, so that is going to be a hurdle. So sometimes that will probably be a primary concern.
Yeah, but at the same time, you have countries where it's also in the interest of the electricity consuming industry to have local electricity generation from renewables rather than relying on a grid, which is not as stable as in some developed countries. So that there are pros and cons here.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's what you said about Lebanon, and maybe like your thoughts on capital cost in and the financial cost in countries. I think we often have the discussion that this is not a renewable energy problem, but a problem of access to international finance from developing countries. So maybe you would like to elaborate on this.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of capital is increasing worldwide, but it's also like more difficult for developing countries to access finance, and it's actually more expensive for developing countries to access these finance because of issues of risk, because of issues of exchange rates, because of issues of risk of defaulting. So there's a lot of efforts that countries and international organizations are trying to do to de-risk these investments. But I think, I mean, there's a lot more that should be done, especially with the big international organizations and the rules and of how they deal with countries and these big infrastructure projects. I will leave it there.
Yes, we see that we're facing in the energy discussions paradigm shifts that go beyond the energy discussion, right? So we have another
to complement. One point to complement that. Sorry to jump here, but I think it's important to also point out that developing countries in the development of renewable energy markets have been a bit also complacent and in getting their own capital interested. So local banks, local entrepreneurs are not putting the capital because they always saw the technology as high risk. But now the reality has changed, and I think we need to see more African capital and African banks engage in the renewable financing instead of real estate, or instead of course, the return on real estate might be higher, but I think that's where we see the issue. We need to get more local financing to these projects.
And there are some good examples that others can learn from.
So would you like to share one or two, Thomas? Because I think this is always, we love examples because they make things tangible.
Well, I think we can see in some African countries very successful projects with local solar electricity systems developing, reducing the cost of energy for the inhabitants at the same time as they provide better energy services, modern electricity rather than kerosene, and people can get access to modern energy in the form of light, charging of telephones, small food preserving, cooling equipment, and things that are really improving their standard of living. And that is financed in a very profitable way because the cost of kerosene is much higher. I think that's one of the most enjoyable developments, because it is helping the very poor people rather than just helping the already rich. I think we also see countries where the conventional energy supply is failing, and where renewables have played a significant role in reducing the energy crisis. South Africa is one, where the attempts to build coal-fired power stations and discussions about building new nuclear has been delaying development, but where renewables are built much faster and with a much better economic turnout. So it's not difficult to find the good examples, and I think we should try to learn from the good examples and not only complain about the bad.
I think that's we're taking on this message. So since we have such a male panel here, I'm just going, Obina, I've seen that you had your hands up before, but I'm first going to ask Yvette to join me here.
Thank you. I mean, I wanted to intervene because we referred to Africa. Now, we know that Africa has a lot of natural resources, but do not add value to those resources. And one of the problems why Africa, as the richest continent in terms of natural resources, Africans are the poorest people in the world. And so now the AU is suddenly waking up to that, and they have a huge industrialization project. But they need energy. And the energy they need is not what we're talking about, having a lantern in a village or having, do we need solid energy to power industry? And renewable energy, yes, the resources are there. But when you think about the cost, I mean, the ADB stated that Africa, in order to meet their objectives in terms of where they want to go in terms of industrialization, etc., will need 190 billion a year until 2030. And that's because of the high capital cost of renewable energy technology. I mean, no country in the world developed without fossil fuel. So African countries now are in a situation where, thanks to climate change, they cannot bring up, or they are not supposed to bring up, large projects using fossil fuels. We are told you have to use renewable technology, but we don't have the money. We don't have the money. We don't have the capital. And again, I know that there would be all things in terms of repayment, but then do we expect that African countries that are looking for industrial, their own industrial revolution, if you like, are hampered by the fact that they cannot, if they cannot use fossil fuels and they cannot bring forward the capital cost, then they're going nowhere.
Thank you, Yvette. So my dear panelists, I think that's, yeah, who wants to jump?
I can
Tarek,
jump into this.
Ahead.
No, I mean, I think Yvette raised a very, very important point. And we've been quite extensively involved in what's called the Africa energy transition narrative, because there's a fundamental debate on the trade-offs. Countries that have gas resources or coal-fired power resources or coal resources, should they forego the development of these resources to deliver power and energy to their consumers and opt for renewable energy? I mean, it has to be a bit slightly more contextualized, the conversation. Our analysis show that actually on the long term, if you take a long-term perspective, you end up actually with a better deal if you do renewable energy, large-scale renewable energy, but also if you do country integration, grid integration, where you can actually, if you approach it regionally, you end up with a better deal in terms of an energy transition that is more affordable, reliable, and security. For example, there's a tremendous amount of hydropower potential in Africa, but you need to get it to the countries. So you need the grid. And so if you collaborate on grid interconnection and development of these resources, you get up with a low carbon energy system and lower cost. We did a simple analysis for one case in Morocco, where even if you want to do a gas-fired power plant and you want to build the terminal, the storage, there's an additional cost that countries are not paying attention to, which is called also the the fiscal cost to the government to build that infrastructure on the long term and payment on this versus developing renewable energy power based with local capital. It's not a black and white argument, but I think we need to look at the cases. Generally, there is a better case. Our analysis showed there is a better case to integrate a higher share of renewables into the Africa energy transition, while in some cases gas might actually play a transitional role, but not on the long-term solution, I think.
Thomas, John, anything to add from? Yeah,
I think it's also important to realize that while in a well-developed country where the infrastructure is present, you may see that solar and wind power is more capital intensive than coal-fired power stations. But I've also seen the opposite. If you look at the development in China, where everything is built, then you see that if you consider also the investment necessary to build new coal mines and new transport infrastructure and new cooling water infrastructure to build a coal-fired power station, even the capital intensity might be as high as building large-scale solar or wind. And as Tarek said, especially in countries where you already have a lot of hydropower, countries like Ghana, for example, if you build a lot of solar and wind, you also have already the ability to use the hydropower system for balancing, which makes it a very effective and economically efficient energy supply system. It is different in countries where there is no infrastructure present, but then consider the fact that it's not only a matter of building a coal-fired power stations, it's also a matter of building all the infrastructure necessary. And it may turn out to be less capital intensive to do it with renewables there as well.
On the other hand, also acknowledging that Africa needs much more development capital than what the international banks.
I
mean, I agree. No doubt.
I mean, it needs. I mean, and there is a unfair deal there in terms of allocating.
Precisely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So I think we have in the chat also like the reference to the 100 billions responsibility indeed from the industrialized countries, but very clearly also the political will from developing countries too. I know that, so I'm jumping in not as moderator here, but we did some analysis on natural gas, and the reality is the natural gas story is even pushed by 20 countries on the African continent that do not even consume natural gas today, because there is very clearly also a massive lobbying behind this that is fostering this discourse. But let's jump to the next question. Obina, you had your hands up. Sorry for bringing Yvette in before you, but please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, my concern is regarding the rural communities in developing countries in Africa. For example, communities are where the agro inputs are being grown. So if we deploy distributed renewable energy, it will stimulate some economic activity in the form of agro processing to add value to their product so that they will improve their economic status. And then you see a reversal of the drift, rural youth migrating from rural community to urban community, and also crime will also be reduced. So when the youth from the rural community have something to do in their community, they can easily settle to do economic activity that will help them. And when you have distributed renewable energy, they have the same stable electricity they are looking for in the cities, and then they have something to do to earn money. So if you look at this, to kind of look at African scenario, and to see not only to deploy renewable energy to provide lighting, cooling, heating, but to stimulate a kind of agro processing that will add value to the people in the community.
Thank you very much, Sabina. So maybe to quickly mention, on Thursday, we have a specific dedicated event on renewable energy in agriculture. So please join us there. But I see my panelists here nodding. So who would like to jump in to answer this question, give some elements?
I was nodding about the event on Thursday.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing. I know that there's a dedicated conversation on this, but I think the linkages between renewable energy and productive use applications is quite well established, and it make the business case for mini grid operators much stronger. I mean, we have noticed that mini grid. We did an analysis jointly with a few other actors in the mini grid operators that have captive load around processing industry, local industry demand. Tend to fare better than just mini grids that supply only for basic rural household needs. So the case is stronger. So the idea is to combine this, and that comes down to government policy to link electrification with also economic development strategies. And we have seen that there's a disconnect there often in these two domains.
Indeed, and there are many of these agri-industrial uses that are well suited to manage a non-continuous supply of solar electricity, for example, when it's milling or pressing oil or cooling fish and things like that. And also, very often, an important factor is to get the fair access to markets. Often rural communities with not so advanced food processing are also victims of an unfair market situation where they do not get the price they deserve. And communication technology can help that also, which electrification makes possible.
And also, just also to quickly mention, like renewables for agriculture, I think it's mostly driven by energy access, because most rural areas also, the lack of grid connectivity is mostly in rural areas where agricultural activity is mostly concentrated. So renewables are really playing a big role in providing access to energy in those areas. And I think we will develop these topics on Thursday in much more detail.
Good.
Maybe one quick part from Nigeria is they built up a rural industrial park, so to say, like bringing electricity for water pumping that increased the yield on the agriculture side and benefit the incomes and actually ensure the food security for the whole country. So I think this underpins again, like we're changing the whole economic systems. Unfortunately, we're almost running out of time. However, I would really like, before you make your final statements, bring up two questions from the chat. Sorry, Jürgen, we'll get back to you on your question. Please put it in the chat. But there is a question on why do you think that the food sector and other subsectors are not using renewables as much as pulp and paper? And then with a question from the US for the evolving business models, because this is linking very much to the heat use also, how have the uptake of heat PPAs been in Europe? Speaking from the US, it's pretty low currently here. So if in your closing remarks, you could refer back to this specific topic of heat and diversity in the industrial uses, this would be great. Who would like to jump in first for closing remarks on renewables in industry? Okay, otherwise I'm going to continue picking. Thomas.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that the opportunities are growing. There are two obstacles. One is a lack of awareness of the opportunities that can be solved. The other is the vested interest trying to slow down development. That's more of a challenge. We see that some industries where they have the resources available, such as pulp and paper industry, where it's easy to use the residues for energy purposes, they have gone quite far, while the other industries where they need to enter into agreements with other suppliers are not picking up as much renewables yet, but it will happen. The development is now one where there is competition between industries and between countries in utilizing these opportunities fast. And that competition is constructive and enjoyable. Thank you.
Mhm. Thanks a lot. Jed, maybe over to you.
Yeah, sure. Industry as a backbone of economic development needs cheap, reliable, secure energy to be competitive. And renewables really are proving that they can be a solution for a lot of industries, but a lot of, I think, tailored policy and action needs to accompany industry subsectors in their journey towards energy transition, especially SMEs that are a little bit left sometimes to their own, and they don't have the capacity to become energy players or in the energy producing business, or to sign PPAs, and they will only rely on the grid. But they need as much attention and support as big industries. Yeah, a lot of exciting things are happening. A lot of healthy competition, as Thomas is saying, is happening, and yeah, we look forward to have another report about the status of industry next year, and we really would like to see more development, more technology development, more countries taking bigger steps in yeah, increasing the uptake of renewables in industry. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Jed. Tarek, more uptake on renewables in industry. This seems to be music in your ears, I guess. What are your final thoughts, and what should happen? What should we focus on as a community?
I think that the time is more than ever right for increased uptake. I mean, I think the economic conditions, the geopolitics, we will see more industry opting for you know, if the legal frameworks are relaxed a bit, more industries would opt for renewables, because this is would address some of the drivers or the issues that we have highlighted earlier. We do, of course, we will see a variety of models and approaches and geographies. My concern is, of course, the energy intensive sectors, the hard to abate industries. We need a more concerted action there, and I see a greater momentum on steel, cement, and fertilizers, with a push to link the decarbonization agenda with increased use of renewables and alternative sources of fuels, innovative fuels, as Thomas mentioned. More attention to heat is required, definitely, and hopefully we can use the global momentum on this. And finally, definitely we need more development capital going into the sector, particularly for countries like Africa, for regions like Africa, and the small island states. Development capital is not enough to really transform these sectors as needed or required.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Yes, because indeed development is like economic development, and as we heard Yvette mention, this industrialization. And so I would like to thank all three of you, Thomas, Tarek, Jed, for joining me here for a very interesting discussion. Personally, I go out of this with the belief that indeed there is a momentum, there are new allies, and we need to tell the renewable stories better in those sectors. But we need to get basically really inspiring stories and case studies on where it is happening, how it is happening out in the world, so that we can also jointly influence policymakers to be more ambitious and accompany the transition. So I ask all of you to share your stories, point us to good case studies, because we will definitely promise that we'll continue reporting on renewable energy in industry, because we believe there is a key lever. And then I invite all of you to join us tomorrow and on Thursday for the last two sector-specific demand-side modules, tomorrow on transportation and on Thursday on agriculture. And I look forward to continue the discussion online, offline, in person, and during the next couple of months. Thank you so much to everybody. Thanks to the audience for participating, and see you very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thanks. Hend,
Yes.
is Mariella there? She wants to sort out this question of participant lists. And I can't do that, and I don't think she's still on the call unless you can see her.
No, I don't. But I can get her. She's in the office next door.
Can you see if you could grab her? Thanks.
The sign.
Sorry, it's Mariela.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hi.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your help. I think we're going to briefly chat with Rana now. So if we could talk later.
I mean, I'm not an expert in finding these things. Lisa is, and I can get her to call you, or we can book a call with her. She assures me that the participant list is there. It's a question of finding it. Okay. I don't speak French. I don't read French, so I'm not going to be much help, given that I don't actually know where to look.
Yeah.
But I can sit and try, but I don't think I'm going to be the best person.
No worries. No worries. Then if we can, if you can connect me with Lisa, then I can.
Let me introduce you by email, and then you can sort out a time that's convenient to both of you.
Sounds
but good. She tells me it's definitely fine.
Okay, that's great, because people were asking for the presentation, so that way we can also share it with them.
Okay,